All right, well, let's go ahead and get started, y'all. Again, thank you so much for being here. You're in the 2022 Continuum of Care Supplemental NOFO or Unsheltered and Rural Notice of Funding Opportunity Competitive Application Process question and answer session. We're going to go through some slides here, but want to make ourselves available to you to ask any questions that you might have and hopefully bring some clarity to what is arguably a confusing process. So Hope is joining me today and put the PowerPoint slides in the chat. So if you download that COC Supplemental Q&A 829 doc, you'll be able to follow along on your computer. I'll be sharing my screen the whole time. And yeah, I'm seeing some folks putting their name and community in the chat. If you feel comfortable doing that, you're welcome to do so. And we're going to go ahead and get started. So again, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. We're really excited to talk more about this supplemental NOFO competitive application process. And yeah, it's been a wild couple of months, so we're really happy to be here. It's been a while. So my name is Jim Ward. I'm the Director of Planning here at Texas Homeless Network. I work primarily in an area of the state called the Texas Balance of State Continuum of Care. Hope, I'm joined today by Hope, and I'll let Hope introduce herself, and then we'll kind of get this party started.
Hi there, my name is Hope Rogers. My pronouns are she, hers, and I'm the COC Performance Manager for the Texas Balance of State Continuum of Care.
Thank you, Hope. So on the agenda today, we are going to do some kind of basics about what a continuum of care is, why that's relevant to this process. We're also going to talk about the funding landscape in the summer of 2022. There's a lot of things happening right now, and wanted to make sure that folks, to the extent that it's possible, have an understanding about this process, but in relation to the larger funding landscape. And then, of course, we're going to talk specifically about the supplemental notice of funding opportunity or supplemental competition processes. So our request for proposals, our application. Then we're also going to talk about resources available to applicants that you can and should use. So just kind of taking a step back and thinking about what a continuum of care is. So I guess I'll just, before we jump into that, HUD released this supplemental notice of funding opportunity back in June, and it requires applicants that are interested in addressing either unsheltered homelessness or rural homelessness to do a couple of things. One, you have to apply for the funds, but you have to apply for those funds through what HUD has termed a continuum of care. So we're going to talk a little bit about what a continuum of care is, but just know that we cover at the continuum of care, and anyone that lives or works in our service area is a member of the continuum of care, but we cover the gamut of planning and support to organizations to address homelessness in their community. So a continuum of care has to have a number of things that are legislatively required or mandated by this continuum of care rules and the Code of Federal Regulations. And that covers everything from the organization of how a continuum of care is structured all the way to the competitive application process that we're engaging in now. We have a number of responsibilities, things such as conducting an annual point in time count, an annual housing inventory count, setting up a coordinated entry system, and then hosting competitive application processes such as this. So this roadmap that's on your screen now, there's a link there that should be functional in the PowerPoint or in the PDF version. Again, not going to go into it in detail right now. That link will take you to an 18-minute video that helps kind of conceptualize the pieces of a continuum of care. And I think it's a really great introductory, it's a great introduction into what a continuum of care is. So to take a step back further, I want to talk a little bit about the Texas Homeless Network, who we are, again, why we're relevant to this process, But at THN, we lead communities to make homelessness rare, brief, and non-recurring. We do that through a variety of different initiatives. The three primary initiatives that we or activities that we carry out are statewide advocacy. We work closely with state departments and also with other organizations, statewide organizations, folks like Disability Rights Texas, to develop a legislative agenda, and then we take that and we take that to the Capitol, and we try to get things on the radar of our state legislators to address homelessness. So that statewide advocacy is separate from what we're talking about today, right? Like there's a whole other department that works on the advocacy and legislative agenda. We at THN, and specifically Hope and I and the folks on the Balance of State team, serve as the Texas Balance of State Continuum of Care Collaborative Applicant. So that means that we fill specific requirements for the Balance of State Continuum of Care in the eyes of HUD. And then also important, we are the HMIS, or Homeless Management Information System, lead agency for this Texas Balance of State Continuum of Care. I feel like I've said Continuum of Care probably 15 times already. I'll probably say it another at least 80 to 90 times by the time this presentation is done. But I think to help, frame what a continuum of care is, and specifically the Balance of State, we develop system level responses and coordinate local community strategies that prevent and end homelessness with the goal of increasing housing stability. So the two questions that are on the screen here, like what is a continuum of care? What is a Balance of State continuum of care? I'm going to try to address those in the coming slides. But if you have questions, please use the chat feature. If I'm losing you already, that's okay. If you're not familiar with the COC, it can be a pretty steep learning curve. So the question, what is a continuum of care? And more specifically, what is the Texas Balance of State Continuum of Care? So I mentioned that continuums of care are these kind of organizational bodies that come together to address homelessness in a given geographic area. So there's actually 4 definitions for continuum of care, but what we're talking about right now when I say the Texas Balance of State Continuum of Care is everything on this map that is in orange. So it's a 215 county area in the state of Texas. And those 215 counties are tied together through this continuum of care process. You can see from looking at the map, there are 11 such COCs in the state of Texas. Most of them are centered around a single county. So El Paso County, Travis County, Bexar County, Harris County, and the Houston area obviously is more than a Harris County. It's Montgomery and Fort Bend as well. But the reason that most of the COCs in the state of Texas are a single county is because the organization, required to carry out a COC in a local community is typically pretty small, right? So even in places like Houston and Harris or Travis and Bexar County, right, like their planning efforts don't extend much outside the city limits of those communities. So in Travis County, the entire county is part of the Travis County Continuum of Care, but they're not focusing specifically on Bastrop or Hays County, and you can apply that same logic to many of the single county COCs in the state of Texas. And so the Balance of State comes in to support those communities that are not part of a local continuum of care for whatever reason. So I think, we could entertain like a whole other session on why Bastrop County, for example, or Williamson County is not part of the Travis County COC. But I think what's most important for this conversation is that for this purpose and the supplemental NOFO, the counties that we're talking about right now in terms of eligibility for certain funding are those counties that are represented on the screen in orange. So I mentioned that the COC is kind of like this organizational group and is developed at the COC level, right? So within each of these 11 COCs, each of them has their own governance structure, has their own relationship to the community that they serve, has their own homeless management information system, their own coordinated entry system. And so by being part of the Texas Balance of State continuum of care, you're actually part of a much larger system that we call the Balance of State. So, and our COC, the parts of the COC that kind of make things work is what I wanted to talk a little bit about now. And so those are these groups that are bulleted here on the screen for you, but our general membership, right? So anyone that lives or works in the Texas Balance of State and has an interest in addressing homelessness in any scope is a member of the Texas Balance of State continuum of care. Basically, you are a member when you say you are a member, right? So anyone that is part of a local homeless coalition, or carries out a point in time count, or hosts a stand down at as part of like trying to assist homeless veterans, like we would consider those folks to be general members of the Texas Balance of State continuum of care. Most of what we try to do is not possible without our general membership. And so we're really grateful to folks that are working in their local community day in and day out, paid and unpaid, lots of weekends, lots of nights to get the things done to address homelessness in their community. So beyond that general membership, we do have a variety of committees. The largest or kind of the top of that committee structure, if you will, would be our Continuum of Care Board. So that COC board is made up of stakeholders from around the state that are elected democratically by the general membership. So they serve 2-year staggered terms. I know we have some board members on the call today, but those board members are, again, elected by their peers to represent the continuum of care in decision-making, things such as the request for proposals that we're going to be talking about a little bit later today, or our coordinated entry system, whatever the case may be. Major changes structurally to the continuum of care go through the COC board. And the COC board takes some of their initiative, I guess, or some of their direction from our COC committees, if you will, right? So there are a variety of COC committees that exist to kind of help develop the functionality of our continuum of care, but also the efficiency of our continuum of care. And those are groups like the Community Investment Committee, which looks at equitable distribution of funding that's available to the continuum of care, or the Data Committee, which looks at HMIS, or Homeless Management Information System policies and procedures. And there are, the newest committee that we have that we're really, really excited about is our Persons with Lived Experience Committee. So that's a very new group that is made up entirely of folks with lived expertise of homelessness, and is quickly kind of becoming a central part of our governance structure. So some of the things that we're going to talk about today have already gone to this Persons with Lived Experience Committee, and we'll continue to go through that as a kind of a structural path for new activities in the Balance of State. So that's really exciting. Then, of course, the Texas Homeless Network, we serve as your collaborative applicant in the Balance of State continuum of care. We also serve as a technical assistance and support resource to folks engaging in the work to end homelessness, but then also as a resource to folks that are experiencing homelessness and don't know where to go, right? Like we'll often field calls from people that are experiencing some type of housing instability and try to route them to the appropriate resources in their community. Then, of course, we also have our local homeless coalitions, which we shorten to LHC. A local homeless coalition is a local planning body that exists to address homelessness specifically in their communities. So kind of, when you're thinking about the structure of a COC and like what it looks like in Austin, a local homeless coalition in the Balance of State is kind of the closest equivalent to a single county COC. Most of the time, LHCs cover a small regional area or a single county, and they are responsible for actually carrying out like the point in time count, recruiting volunteers for the point in time count, rallying providers to participate in the housing inventory count, and so on. And then finally, we also have our coordinated entry planning entities, or CPs. So coordinated entry planning entities are local groups focused on the implementation of coordinated entry in their area. And so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on that planning body today, but know that it's a critical function of the Balance of State COC. So I wanted to talk briefly about what these funding processes look like. So our COC, excuse me, just one second, y'all. Sorry about that. So our COC operationalizes these kinds of funding opportunities through a pretty predictable path. So initially, when we're alerted to a new funding availabilities, anything from the COC annual program competition or the supplemental program competition, we will develop an RFP or an application and an evaluation tool. And then the COC board will vote to approve that or give us additional direction about, no, I think you really need to think about this other thing over here before we kind of take this public. So that's kind of the first step. Once we have gotten approval from our COC board, we will then publicly announce the opportunity for interested applicants. We'll post our materials, host training such as this, provide technical assistance, and applicants will respond to that request for proposals. Following submission, we have an internal review at THN Staff, look to make sure that the applicant follows the request for proposals, the activities that are proposed are eligible under the COC program. Once an applicant has gone through this completeness and quality review, it will move on to the independent review team. So IRT stands for independent review team. So those are a group that we have not talked about, but those are a group of COC members that we recruit through our newsletter and through direct service partners around the state to review and score applications. And then following their review of those applications, we bring them back and look at their scores and then rank them for the COC board to review and approve. And then finally, we submit all of that onto HUD and then take a breather and then move on to the next thing, which is usually the point in time count. So that's a really quick Cliff Notes walk through the competition. It is deceivingly simple on this slide, and I wish it were this simple for all of us, but it is unfortunately not. So yeah, the funding landscape in 2022. So 2022 has been an incredible year in a lot of ways. There is a historic amount of funding potentially available to continuums of care, but not every continuum of care. So I'll explain a little bit more about what I mean by that, but there are essentially two opportunities right now that are in play that are important for applicants or organizations that are operating housing and housing supports to be aware of. And those are the 2022 Supplemental NOFO to address rural and unsheltered homelessness, and then the FY2022 annual COC program competition, which I've shortened the title of because it's very long and the remainder of the title is not relevant to this conversation. But both of these opportunities are exciting because they represent an opportunity to bring additional funds into communities, but share a lot of similarities. So applications are required to be submitted to and evaluated by the COC's collaborative applicant. Again, that's THN. We use a software platform called Apply, which is our grant application software. There's a link to the Apply homepage here in your PowerPoint. Both of them this year have very tight timelines and require meticulous attention to detail. So when you're dealing with federal funds, of course, you've got to cross your T's, dot your I's, and then double check it, have somebody else double check it before you submit it. And both of them this year, both of these opportunities require collaborations with partners and the ability to be able to demonstrate performance towards some shared objectives. Both of them are part of a larger collaborative application process. So again, I kind of alluded to it earlier. This competitive process is part of a larger package that is submitted to HUD on behalf of the continuum of care. And that's more relevant to this supplemental NOFO than I think it has been in years past with the annual notice, primarily because of some of the requirements associated with being able to access these historic amounts of funding. So we're not going to spend any time at all today talking about the annual COC program competition. There was a webinar that we hosted on the 22nd. It is hosted on our website at this point. You're welcome to go back and review that. I would be remiss to say that applications for the annual are due in 2 days at 11:59 p.m. However, what we're talking about right now is the supplemental NOFO. And so with that opportunity, there's a little bit more time, not a lot. Really, the days just seem to kind of all blur together these days, but applications for the supplemental NOFO will be due on September the 11th, 2022 at 11:59 p.m. So that's a Sunday, September the 11th, 2022 at 11:59 p.m. So we did release a request for proposals on Friday, August the 26th. If you did not get that email blast, I'm kind of surprised that you found this webinar, but glad that you're here, and you can sign up for our competition updates using a link a little bit later on in this presentation. So why is this so historic? So HUD is made available for communities, and specifically in the balance of state, over a period of 3 years, $50 million available to address unsheltered homelessness and homelessness amongst those with severe service needs. So that works out to a significant amount of money. I believe it says in the RFP it's somewhere around $16 million annually. And that is a tremendous amount of money, no matter how you look at it. When you think about the historic context of the balance of state continuum of care. Again, just for context, in a given renewal cycle for the continuum of care annual program competition, there's about $12 million in renewal projects currently in operation in the balance of state. So it's more than 100% of what currently exists in our COC is theoretically possible to be brought to Texas through this process. So those unsheltered funds and the rural funds alike are for new projects to address homelessness amongst people that meet HUD's definition of literal homelessness. With the rural set aside, there is, again, about 17 million over the course of 3 years. That works out to like $6.3 million annually. Those funds are also intended to be used for new projects that serve people experiencing literal homelessness. But there's some additional eligible activities associated with the rural set aside funds that you don't have access to under the unsheltered. So both of these opportunities come with 3-year grant terms. So folks that apply through this process and are selected for award by HUD would get a 3-year contract. It's in 12-month increments. So you would perform for 12 months, submit an annual performance report, perform for another 12 months, submit another annual performance report, and then following that third annual performance report, the funds will expire. Presumably, there will be some method for renewal. HUD assures us that there will be some method for renewal. However, it's not clear right now what that process will look like. And the applicant, eligibility will vary to some extent by set aside. So, there's these 2 pots of money. One, the unsheltered, that again is intended to address people that are either living unsheltered currently, have a history of unsheltered homelessness, or that have some other severe service need in a community. So not necessarily people that are currently living unsheltered, but I think if you're not going to target that group, you would need to make the case to why this other group is the most important group in the community to focus unsheltered funds on. But the rural set aside can only be used in specific counties within our COC. So those unsheltered funds can be used everywhere, right? Like all 215 counties are eligible under the unsheltered set aside. Under the rural set aside, that number drops to about 166 counties in the state, in our balanced estate continuum of care. So when you visit the application portal and you click on the rural, one, you can see HUD's definition of rural here by clicking on the link in this PowerPoint, but there is also an interactive map in Apply that will hopefully give you a visual representation of the counties that are eligible under the rural set aside. Additionally, because this is such a historic opportunity and these applications are so nuanced and complex, applicants are allowed one project application between any of these available funding opportunities. So if an applicant is eligible to choose between the rural and unsheltered based on geography, that's a decision that the applicant needs to make. They cannot apply for both the rural and the unsheltered. Even if someone is eligible to apply under all three, we are asking someone or an organization to pick the opportunity that has the potential for the most impact for the community and the organization, and give that opportunity everything that you've got. The timelines that we're talking about here are simply too accelerated to submit quality applications for more than one opportunity in most cases. And so that's a really important part that I wanted to clarify for folks. It is in the RFP. We'll talk a little bit more about what's in the RFP here in a minute, but that's one that we've gotten a lot of questions about. One of the things that's really important to understand here is that if you were to submit the same project under the rural and the unsheltered set aside, and let's say the stars aligned and HUD awarded both of those projects, they're not going to just pick one or the other, or you're not going to be able to say, I want just this one or I want just this one. They would expect both of those both of those projects to be standalone and both of them to start operation following award. So I've mentioned, I think, numerous times that the applications must be submitted to THN through the COC's collaborative applicant. And again, the timelines that we're talking about here are very accelerated. I just want to pause there and acknowledge that we're asking folks to do like this Herculean task of getting all these pieces together in such a short amount of time. And if there were any other way that we could do this, I assure you that we would explore that and try to take advantage of it to the best of our ability. I think that even though we're talking about accelerated timelines, we have built in some flexibility into this process that I think applicants will find to be helpful. So when you go to the application portal, so when you go to apply, you'll see a number of things available to apply for on that site, right? There's a total of 4 different applications. The ones that are relevant for this conversation today are the rural application and the unsheltered application. It is critical that applicants understand which opportunity they are applying for. One, it will impact dramatically the scoring, but 2, if you are intending to apply under the rural set aside and you accidentally start an unsheltered application, we can't just move you on the back end into the rural application. It will require you to stop, abandon that application, and then start over in the correct application path, so to speak, within Apply. And similarly within eSnaps, it is critical that folks understand the direction that they're heading before they get started. And so again, you will see one in Apply that's clearly marked rural set aside, and one that is clearly marked unsheltered set aside. So the other thing that's important to note here is that unless we hear differently from HUD, we will be ranking these projects separately from one another. So that means that rural projects will be competing against other rural projects, and unsheltered projects will be competing against other unsheltered projects. So a rural project would not compete against directly an unsheltered set-aside project. Now, I say directly because at the end of the day, this is all a competitive application process, and our goal at THN is to ensure that our COC is as competitive as possible, but there are 385 other continuums of care out there that could be applying also to this opportunity. Again, what's I think something that we haven't really spoken about, at least at this point, that it is addressed in the RFP, is that applicants must demonstrate that they are able to leverage housing or healthcare partnerships. That is a component of the application and apply. It is also a big component of the COC's application, which directly impacts an individual project's likelihood of funding. So we are asking applicants to demonstrate through firm written commitments some type of partnership and put a dollar value on that partnership as it relates to housing or healthcare resources that you are leveraging for this process. So the RFP goes into detail that we're not going to have time to go into today. But specifically, right, we're looking for organizations to leverage relationships with their housing authority or with some other housing provider, whether that's like a CHODO in your community or a community housing development organization, or that is a private market landlord, or that's a tax credit property, or that's a substance abuse treatment recovery center, or that's your local mental health authority. The options, there's just so many different ways that could come to fruition. It would be impossible for us to list them all here. I think when we're talking about these firm written commitments, what we're talking about is something that benefits an individual. At some level, there will be a direct correlation between a participant in the project and this relationship, and that is quantifiable, and that you can put a dollar amount or value on that leveraged resource. The other critical thing, and I wish that the word "or" was capitalized here, is housing or healthcare partnerships. It is not necessary or likely even that folks will be able to leverage both of those opportunities or both of those requests. The COC is scored on the extent to which we can leverage additional housing and healthcare resources. So if you're able to leverage both, that would be tremendous. Again, I think it kind of goes back to, determining which one of those partnerships would be more critical for your community, and then putting everything you've got behind developing that partnership. We're asking, recognizing that a firm written commitment requires conversation. It requires back and forth between the applicant and their partners. And we are on an accelerated timeline. And so wanting to really do right by the applicants and their partners, I think what makes the most sense is, picking what y'all are strongest at or what your organization is strongest at, and leveraging that to the greatest extent possible. Courtney asked, is the chat or the Q&A box the preferred spot for submitting questions? Thank you so much, Courtney. Yeah, if you would just drop them in the chat. Let me just check the Q&A and see if there are any. Does not look like there are any questions in the Q&A pod. So yeah, if you have questions, please put them in the chat. Yeah, and then Teresa, I see your question there on minimums and maximums. So I think that's a great segue into the solicitation itself. So what you can find where in the request for proposals. So the guiding document for all of these requested activities is your request for proposals. It's on the THN website. And I've broken it down by section here to tell you what is in each section. But to answer your specific question explicitly, Teresa, one, it depends. It always depends, right? It depends on whether you're applying for the unsheltered or the rural set aside. If you're applying for the unsheltered set aside, there is a minimum request of $200,000 and maximum request of $2 million annually. If you are applying under the rural set aside, there is a minimum request of $200,000 and a maximum request of $1 million annually. So the total budget would be, maximum for the unsheltered would be $6 million over 3 years. Maximum budget under the rural would be $3 million over 3 years and $600,000 on the minimum for each. So Courtney asked a question, can a PHA provide a community-wide commitment letter, or does it need to be specific to each applicant project? Yeah, that's a great question, Courtney. It does need to be specific to the applicant, although if you are in a situation where a PHA is willing to provide a community-wide commitment letter, that's ideal. It's just that in order for an applicant to really leverage that, it's going to need to be at the project level. Will the total amount be divided by 3 years, or is that the amount given each year? So Gloria asks, will the total amount be divided by 3 years, or is that the amount given each year? Example, if we requested $300,000 for rapid rehousing, if your intent is that for that to be an annual amount, you'll need to give us, oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah. So in the solicitation, we're asking for annual amounts, not the total for all 3 years. Although for your eSNAPS application, you will need to give the annual amount, and then they will auto calculate that to a 3-year amount, if that makes sense. Great. So going back to the solicitation and the RFP itself, it's divided into 7 sections. Each section is intended to have a little bit of a different focus. So section 1 is kind of the introductory section. It also gives the background and some key considerations for applicants. And this competition, again, this looks different from previous annual COC program competitions that we've hosted. Not so much in like the pieces of the puzzle, so to speak, but just how accelerated this whole thing is. So there are some really important considerations for applicants in that key considerations section of section 1. And then also are the applicant requirements. So applicant requirements are anything from, applicants are required to have a system for award management registration that's active. They're required to supply their unique entity ID. There's a variety of requirements for applicants. Most of the applicant requirements in section 1 are statutory in nature, right? Like we didn't just make up applicant requirements. Those are things that are required by HUD as an eligibility criteria for the Continuum of Care program. And then Michelle asks, can you type the maximum and minimum request for the rural and the unsheltered? Yeah, absolutely. Hope, can you help Michelle out with that? So section 2 is where the beef of the solicitation really is, right? Like that's where that's the scope of work is the title of that section in the request for proposals. That's where we talk about what types of activities are eligible, and then specific application requirements such as the minimum and maximum. So because of the complexity of what we're talking about here, HUD is like essentially under one notice made available 2 different pots of money. And so section 2 is divided in part, at least, into a section that addresses the unsheltered set aside, and then another section that addresses the rural set aside. And that's where you can find your application minimums and maximums. That's where if you're applying under the rural set aside, you can find specific criteria about additional eligible activities that are not eligible under the unsheltered. That's also where you can find more information about leveraging housing or healthcare resources. And then something that I think I mentioned on a previous slide that we haven't really talked about today or talked about yet are the matching requirements for the Continuum of Care program. So I'm real briefly, again, because all of this is also in the RFP, HUD is interested in applications for permanent supportive housing, or PSH, which is a non-time limited intervention. Most often that's structured as tenant-based rental assistance paired with what HUD would call supportive services, which must include holistic case management, but can also include other activities such as education, helping participants attain education that will enable them to enter the workforce or return to the workforce, childcare that will enable a participant to participate in the workforce, or participate in education to participate in the workforce. Those supportive services are a pervasive theme throughout all of these project application types, no matter if it is the rural set aside or the unsheltered set aside. All of these projects have to incorporate supportive services, and specifically, they must incorporate holistic case management as a required supportive service within each project type. So permanent supportive housing is, again, a non-time limited intervention. And the focus there of the case management is to promote housing stability and to promote income growth, right? Like most often, well, I shouldn't say most often, but frequently, when folks are identified as an eligible candidate for permanent supportive housing, they don't have access to any income supports. And so a big part of that holistic case management is helping folks identify what income supports might be available to them to help promote that housing stability. So through this opportunity, that looks like technical assistance through SOAR or SSI, SSDI, outreach, access, and recovery. SOAR is a model of helping someone access mainstream service benefits through SSI or SSDI. It is not the same as like helping someone fill out an SSI application and then crossing your fingers. It's a very intensive process that we're partnering with SAMHSA and the policy research associates that are the technical assistance arm of SAMHSA's SOAR program to really focus on how do we grow and get access to income supports for people participating in the both unsheltered and the rural competitive processes. So like if a project is to go to award through this notice, there would be an expectation that there is someone at the organization whose primary focus is to help participants access income through the SOAR model. And that applies also to rapid rehousing and this THRRH project. So I'll move us along to rapid. Rapid is a time-limited intervention. Rapid rehousing is a time-limited intervention. Participants can access rental assistance for up to 24 months. And in those 24 months, the goal of the program is to promote stability and income growth so that whenever the assistance stops at the end of those 24 months, that folks are able to maintain the housing that they've acquired through the supports of the program independently without further assistance. Typically, these are folks that are maybe a little bit less vulnerable on, on any kind of like assessment. These are people that it's, likely that they're going to be able to return to the workforce, or that they have sufficient non-employment income to be able to sustain housing without assistance. But rapid rehousing is in most communities the kind of the bulk of the intervention, or should be the bulk of the intervention. And that's where the majority of people experiencing homelessness are going to see the greatest benefit from a rapid rehousing type of an approach. And so it's a really important part of a community's response to addressing homelessness. The same though applies to that holistic case management, right? Like it is simply not enough to just apply for rental assistance and then be a rental assistance administrator, right? Like that's just not going to be enough for folks experiencing homelessness in all likelihood. And so we need that flexibility to meet the needs of the people that are referred to the project and that are served by the project. Third is transitional housing and rapid rehousing. So that is a relatively new component type that's actually not in the federal regulations. So there's that. But THRRH combines two component types, that is transitional housing and rapid rehousing. Now, I just want to pause here for a second because I feel like people sometimes when they hear transitional housing, like they're like, oh, that's all I need to hear. That's where we're at. The reality is that HUD, even though they will fund transitional housing, the priority must be on permanent housing. And so HUD's expectation, and probably HOPE's as well, but HUD's expectation would be that folks are moving on through transitional housing into rapid rehousing with a focus on helping people achieve permanence that's just simply not available through transitional housing. So it combines both, again, the kind of short-term immediate access of a transitional housing program. So whether that be reserved beds like a hotel block, and you have like so many hotel rooms, and people you encounter them, they go into the hotel room while you're finding permanent housing for them, and then they move on to the rapid rehousing component, or whatever the case may be. There's myriad ways that a THRRH project could be structured to meet the needs of the community. I think what's most critical in the end is that HUD has a really clearly articulated expectation that the rapid rehousing or the permanent housing portion of that project is the focus. So when I try to help people think about like, well, what does that look like? Think about it in, you could try to think about it in this way, right? The transitional housing serves to make the rapid rehousing more efficient and to more quickly resolve someone's immediate housing crisis. So it is as a support to rapid, not a replacement for rapid. HUD actually requires that applicants to this pool of funding or this component type actually offer twice the rapid rehousing than they would transitional housing. So if you're thinking about, in terms of project design, like, well, we have, 10 units of transitional housing that we could leverage for a THRRH project. That's awesome. You're going to need at least 20 units of rapid rehousing to meet HUD's expectation around the setup of that type of a project. And then again, with THRRH, there is an expectation around this holistic case management, but also leveraging resources that exist in the community, right? Like a single organization in most cases it's not going to be possible for a single organization to check all these boxes. You need partnerships with your community partners. There is some, in very rural parts of the state, obviously, there may only be a single organization in that part of the state. And, that there are situations where it does make sense for the applicant to try to do a lot of different things, but really leaning on the expertise of the community and trying to develop partnerships, I think, is the name of the game and for this competition. And then finally is SSO-SO. So SSO-SO sounds like it could be like a song or something, but stands for Supportive Services Only Street Outreach. So Supportive Services Only Street Outreach is essentially what it sounds like, right? It is a project that exists to identify people experiencing homelessness in a community and connecting them with resources to meet their housing crisis. An SSO-SO project, it identifies folks, it provides some housing navigation, it provides case management, it can provide light touch transitional case management. Once a household is identified, a permanent placement and actually been placed. Something that's really important for an SSO project is that the case management activities have to stop at the point that someone's been housed for 6 months. So let's say you identified someone, in an encampment in your community, you're working with them, you connect them with another housing project. That housing project works with them. You help get all the pieces in place. That person's housed. You're supporting them through that transition. At the point that they've been housed for 6 months, you have to close that enrollment and move on to the next person. The focus here is really on that navigation piece for people that are experiencing homelessness. It's first and foremost a project intended to identify and help people exit homelessness as a primary focus. So all of those, so that I just rattled off at y'all is both of those, or excuse me, all of that is eligible under both components, right? And so, under both set-asides. Each component is eligible under both set-asides. Within the rural set-aside, there are some additional activities that I was not intending for us to go way deep into today. They are listed under the rural set-aside, so section B of it's section 2B of the RFP, but those are things like emergency lodging, rent and utility arrears in some limited instances, emergency food and clothing assistance, repairs to units to bring them to habitability, and then this really kind of obscure making use of federal inventory programs, which is something that nonprofits actually have access to, but there are costs associated with using those types of programs when there's something there to be used. So all of that, all of those additional activities are eligible under the rural set-aside. The RFP again goes into much greater detail. I think the one that I wanted to make sure that we addressed on the call today was the emergency lodging as a resource for an applicant to again promote immediate access to housing stability, whether that's again temporary with an emergency housing lodging voucher at a hotel room, or temporary shelter bed. I want to be really clear though that applicants cannot use the emergency lodging available under the rural set-aside to create permanent shelter beds or replace the funding for existing shelter capacity. It has to grow the capacity of the shelter. So if thinking about that, if you don't have any shelter in your community, well then of course emergency lodging would give you some way to increase shelter capacity where none exists, but it cannot create permanent shelter beds. So you couldn't use emergency lodging under the rural set-aside to do rehabilitation to structures in an emergency shelter. I think kind of what makes the most sense is, again, like hotel rooms or some other means of providing a voucher or emergency lodging to folks while they identify a permanent placement. I'll pause right there and just see if there are any questions about section 1 or 2 before I move us on. Okay, well, no questions. I'll move us along to section 3, which is where you can find the timeline for this process. So I mentioned before, applications are due September 11th at 11:59 p.m. That is a Sunday. I can tell you that if you've emailed me recently, you know that I probably work on hours, and I cannot guarantee that if you email myself or the TXBOS COC mailbox on Sunday afternoon with help, how do I access the application or something like that, that we're going to be able to give you a satisfactory response. We will absolutely do our best to help you navigate this process, but I would implore you, please, please, please do not delay. I feel like every day that passes in general, like the COC's competitiveness dwindles, right? Like this is something that we have to prioritize, and we have to prioritize it reasonably soon in order to be able to check all the boxes on this process. And submit something that has a chance at getting funded. So in section 3, you can find the timeline and the deadlines. That's really all that's in section 3. But there's a chart there with all the deadlines that you would need to know throughout this process. Again, September 11th is the application deadline, but then following the application, during that review process, if THN needs to clarify a portion of your application, or you've availed yourself of some flexibility that exists in the RFP to like seek additional time on certain components, like it's important that we have access to one another through that evaluation process. And so the timeline kind of clarifies some of that, as does section 5 and 6 of the RFP. So section 4 of the RFP are the contents of the actual application itself. So we talk about what you will actually put into apply and what you'll put into eSnaps. That's not the only place that you'll see the contents of the application. We're going to talk about the appendices here in just a minute, but the appendices are a great resource to applicants as they're kind of navigating this process. But it talks about, again, what you'll submit and apply, what you'll submit in eSnaps. Section 5 is a pretty short section. It covers primarily the application submission in apply. Not a whole lot of content there. Section 6 looks at the evaluation, so the completeness review that staff conduct when an application is submitted, the quality review that is conducted following the completeness review, the independent review team's evaluation of project applications, and then the ranking process following the completion of the independent review team scoring. All of that is also addressed in the timeline in terms of like what happens when. Just know that we are required to and will have a final notification to applicants about whether or not their applications are accepted and ranked, or declined and not ranked, no later than October the 5th. The plan, I think right now, is to get those notifications out on October the 4th, actually. But just know that in no circumstance will it happen after October the 5th. Section 7 talks about the award of these projects. It's pretty standard language, right? Like when projects under the Supplemental NOFO are selected for award, I think it is pretty obvious that things will need to happen quickly at that point. Once HUD has made their determination about who they will award, they will want to move quickly to get the projects under contract and then get the projects operational. I say quickly, we're still talking about HUD. That process takes several months sometimes. I've seen it take as long as 7, 8, 9 months. So the hope is that, through our evaluation process and the support that we're able to offer folks in submitting their materials, that those post-award terms and conditions that HUD can levy on a project will be minimal, and that these projects will be able to go to operation pretty quickly. So we got a question earlier today in the mailbox, like what's the timeline on all this? So that's hard to say in some ways. I can tell you like what the last day that things can happen. So we will go through this process now, right? We're going to submit our consolidated application, which includes the ranked list of projects under both the rural and the unsheltered set-asides, to HUD no later than October the 20th. We're anticipating award announcements in early 2023. So think like Q1 of 2023. Last year, the awards for the annual came out, I believe, at the end of February. So they are almost always pretty early on in the calendar year. They used to try to get them out like at the end of the same year that they were submitted. So, you'd like submit in August, and then you would know by December whether or not you were going to get a project in 2023. That's probably not going to be the case this year. I would prepare folks for an award announcement in early 2023, with the intent that projects go under contract by the end of calendar year 2023. So that means that the applicant applies, is awarded, and then HUD will, that award is actually a notice of conditional award. So that's when they will do another round of evaluation and see if there are any terms and conditions that need to go on the grant. For example, one term or one condition that's always on every project that gets awarded is updated match information. So you'll give HUD your match information, and then they will ask for it again once they've selected that project for conditional award, and you'll have to satisfy that match requirement again at that time, which is good because things change, right? And you may have access to other resources that you didn't know about when you were filling out this project application, but you'll have to satisfy those terms and conditions. And so that's the process that can take a really long time if you're not careful. And so, and all projects, at least per the rules that I've read, must be under contract no later than September 30th of 2024. Now, I think HUD is going to be pushing hard for these projects to be operational in 2023. But just know that, like, if something happens and your project does not get to start early, it has to start by September 30th of 2024. And I don't know exactly what would happen if a project that was awarded under this process was not in operation in September of 2024. I just don't know. It's an unusual process, and they have not clarified that. So yeah, so there's a couple of questions in the chat. So I want to make sure I'm understanding this correctly. This is from William. Well, William, I see that that's the hosts and panelists. Do you want me to ask that question to everyone, or answer that question for everyone? Was that your intent? And then, well, okay, cool. So so I just want to make sure I'm understanding this correctly. If we apply for the DV bonus, we cannot apply for the unsheltered. Is that correct? So that is correct. Now, I think the caveat that I would make there is under the DV bonus and the COC bonus RFP, expansions to existing COC renewal project applications are not considered new applications for the purposes of your single project application. So there is a very small subset of the universe that is already operating COC projects that is applying to expand those existing activities. If that is the case for you, then you would still be eligible to submit a new project application under the supplemental rural or unsheltered set aside. If you are a new applicant that is applying for the DV bonus to implement new activities under the DV bonus, then yes, you would need to pick either the DV bonus or the rural or the unsheltered. You would not be able to do the DV bonus and the rural or unsheltered. So Teresa asked, who do I talk to get back into my eSnaps account? Yep, and you're right, Gloria, thank you for that. You do. You email eSnaps at esnaps@hud.gov. You may need to provide them some specific information if no one else at your organization has access to eSnaps. If you are all the way locked out, but yes, you need to reach out to eSnaps sooner rather than later. That is not something that we can help with. And similarly, if you find yourself to be locked out of Apply, that is also not something, we cannot reset your Apply password. So that is something that you will need to follow the process within the Apply portal itself to reset your password. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the appendices. So this year we're making this information available to folks a little bit differently. If you recall these processes from years past, there is typically this massive 100 and some odd page document that contains the RFP plus all of the appendices in just one PDF file. And so we're making the appendices available as part of a larger zip application package as standalone documents. So folks maybe are more inclined to access the one that they might need. So Appendix A is the application component. So it's actually a chart, and it looks at every section of the apply application and what you need to do in that section, of the apply application, depending on whether or not you're applying under the unsheltered or whether or not you're applying under the rural set aside. By and large, the applications themselves are very similar, with some notable exceptions. Obviously, there's some things that we're asking rural applicants that we're not asking unsheltered applicants, and vice versa. So it's really important that you're looking at the right one. Each application type is got a different color banner at the top of it. So make sure that you're looking at the right application within that document. It is all still rural and unsheltered in one appendix. So you just want to be really, really certain that you're looking at the right thing whenever you're utilizing that chart to kind of guide your application work. Appendix B is the COC plan to address severe service needs. So we haven't really spent any time at all talking about the COC plan, which Mary Stockey spent a tremendous amount of time on with the help of our general membership to develop. So the COC plan is kind of the guiding plan, or the guiding document for the implementation of these unsheltered funds. So all applications, and this is again addressed in the RFP, must align with the priorities set forward in the COC plan. So those priorities are excerpted from the COC plan and inserted into the RFP, just so you don't have to go searching for them in the plan. They're clearly marked in the plan, but it's still, it's nice to just kind of have it in one place. Applicants are highly encouraged to read and understand that COC plan to address severe service needs, because a lot of the priorities that come from that plan are again something that applicants must align with. So it's a really important part of this whole thing. I can't believe I haven't talked about it before now, but that COC plan in whole is available to applicants as Appendix B of the RFP, and part of that zip file application package on the website. Appendix C and D are the actual applicant questions that you will see in apply in an Excel format, along with the assessment criteria for those questions. So for example, when we ask, how your project implements housing first, applicants are highly encouraged to review Appendix C and Appendix D when developing your project applications and when completing the narratives and the questions in apply. It's less relevant for your eSNAPS project application because they're not asking the same kinds of questions. There's a different document for your eSNAPS project application that's talked about in the RFP, but it's called the detailed instructions. If you've known me for any amount of time, you will know that I typically will just be talking about the detailed instructions until I'm blue in the face because they're that important. I don't even look at this stuff without having a copy of the detailed instructions available to me. 99% of the questions that we get about eSNAPS can be addressed by reviewing the detailed instructions and doing a Control F keyword search of those documents. So definitely encourage you to download those. There's links to them in the RFP. But Appendix C is for the rural set aside and Appendix D is for the unsheltered. Again, there's different questions, so make sure that you're referencing the same document. Those are for your reference only. They're not required to be submitted in apply. If you want to know everything that needs to be submitted in apply, you would want to look at Appendix A because that's going to tell you, oh yeah, under organizational capacity, I'm going to need to upload an organizational chart, or oh, here's where I upload my match documentation. Here's what my match documentation needs to needs to say. So all that stuff is available to you in Appendix A. It's also available in the body of the RFP, but it's a little bit easier whenever you can just visit one resource to know what all you need to do. And then Appendix E is the grievance policy. So applicants that believe that they have been unfairly impacted by application of the RFP or a policy referenced in the RFP, have rights available to them, and we would encourage you to explore those. If you need to use the grievance policy, it is there to you, available to you as Appendix E of the RFP. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about what the content of the application that you'll see in Apply. So both the rural and unsheltered follow the same application path in Apply. So both of them are going to have this intent to apply. The intent to apply is not to screen people out. It is to make sure that before people invest a ton of time into their project application, that they have accurately identified the project application or that the opportunity type, that the activities that they're proposing are eligible, that they meet, some of the stipulations in the RFP, such as minimum and maximum budget sizes. And so an applicant that submits an intent to apply that doesn't align with the RFP will be notified in email, and then their application will be reopened, and they can either abandon it because it doesn't fit with what their organization wants to do, or they can revise and resubmit. But all applicants will need to go through this intent to apply process before they have access to the full application. The intent to apply will stay open through the entirety of this full application process. So until September 11th, 2022. However, again, if someone comes on September the 10th to submit a fresh intent to apply, that is going to make it pretty challenging for them to be successful. Likewise, if you submit an intent to apply that identifies your application as a rapid rehousing project component type, for example, and then later on you determine that you really want to do PSH, it is very challenging to make sure that that application that you started will see, will have the correct questions asked. So if at some point in this process you determine that, hey, we're going to shift gears entirely, and we're going to, instead of doing rapid, we want to do PSH, like, you can definitely do that. Please reach out to THN first to make sure that you're doing that in a way that, doesn't create a ton of extra work for yourself, and that you're completing the application the way that it was intended. It is possible to catch like weird little glitches in the system, especially if you change parts of the intent to apply after it's been submitted the first time. Within the full application, all applicants will complete these bulleted items here. So we want to know about your agency's capacity, right? Like, we want to know about your financial management and your administration structure. Like, what does the internal control environment look like at your organization? What does an org chart look like that was developed or updated in 2022? We know organizations have undergone a tremendous amount of transition in the last 3 years, including THN. And so we think it's really important to just keep that administrative structure up to date so that someone from the outside can understand what's happening at the organization. We are tasked with ensuring that these funds, that we recommend organizations that have the capacity to administer these funds. So we do ask questions again about your financial management and administration at the organizational level. We also ask component specific questions. So those component specific questions for both the rural and the unsheltered are about how the project itself aligns with the COC plan, how the project will contribute to, or positively contribute to, system performance measures, general application questions that are applicable to the component type. So whether that's a PSH or a rapid rehousing. Under the unsheltered set aside, those folks will see one set of questions. or a rapid under the rural set aside. We'll see a little bit of a different set of questions under the general application section of the full application. But all applicants are required to submit responses to these general application questions. Again, the full content of which can be downloaded from Appendix C or D, whichever is relevant to your organization. In addition, we want to know about the monitoring history of your organization. If you're subject to certain single financial audit requirements by the federal government, meaning you administer more than $750,000 in federal funds, including pandemic relief funds that would subject you to the single financial audit requirements at 2 CFR 200. We want to know about that. We want to know about your monitoring history. We want to know about any findings that you've had or any deobligated or unspent or recaptured funds. It's an opportunity for us to learn a little bit more about the organization to be able to tell HUD and make recommendations based on the best information that we have available to us. So monitoring history is really important. Similarly, the budget section is where you'll go in depth about the activities that you're proposing, both the funds that you're requesting from HUD for things like rental assistance and supportive services, but also where you will tell us about the leveraged assistance that you're bringing to the table. So like if you are bringing $100,000 of substance abuse treatment and by way of inpatient bed days at a local treatment facility, you would tell us about it in that budget section. You would obviously also tell us about it in, maybe not obviously, but you would also tell us about it in the alignment with the COC plan where we ask about leveraging housing and healthcare resources. So that budget section is something that every applicant will need to complete. We tried to make it as easy as possible. I will say we're also talking about the most complicated pool of funding that I've ever dealt with. So it's a lot. And then talked a little bit about budget, file uploads. So file uploads are things like your eSNAPS applicant profile, your eSNAPS project application, your certification of consistency with the consolidated plan. Again, all of that stuff is described in excruciating detail in the RFP and in Appendix A. But if you have questions about any of this materials, we invite you to reach out. Michelle asks, this sounds massive. Can it be completed in 10 days? Michelle, I think that I will not deny or challenge that it is a massive undertaking. I do think that it can be completed in 10 days. I think it's going to require some clearing of calendars for sure. And I wish it were different, but I do think that we'll get some applicants out of it. Something that I've been kind of talking with other COCs about is the sacrifice and quality that happens when we're working on such an accelerated timeline. But yeah, it definitely can be done. I know it's going to be tough. So one thing we haven't talked about here is office hours. So if you look in the RFP on section 3 in the timeline, there are specific office hours listed in that timeline. And those are essentially open access to THN staff on Fridays from 9 to 1 p.m. every Friday. And so we are available to you as much as we can be. But yeah, it's 100% a lot of work. We didn't really talk about the eSNAPS project application, but the eSnaps project application is HUD's grant management software. So eSnaps is where HUD does all of their project solicitations, but also where they will award the contract. So if a project is selected for award, that's where you'll learn about all the terms and conditions associated with the award. There's two parts of this process. There's the applicant profile and the project application. I just want to be really clear about this part. There is no scenario in which we can, and I believe that is supposed to say AM. I hope that didn't come from the RFP. There is no scenario in which we can accept eSnaps content after October the 4th. The reason for that is because we have to announce and make a decision about whether or not that particular project will be included in the priority listing no later than the 5th. And so if you haven't submitted all of the application components and we don't have a complete application for you at the time that we have to make that decision, we will unfortunately not be able to make that recommendation without a complete package. So there is some flexibility built into the RFP to give folks additional time if they can demonstrate that they've made satisfactory progress towards getting the pieces in place by the September the 11th deadline. Just know that the deadline in the RFP for the quality review and in that section of the RFP that talks about the eSnaps application and applicant profile, we cannot move that deadline from October the 4th. Yeah, highly encourage questions about that. You're welcome to join us at our office hours. The thing that we've done this year that I think will help in this process, and Michelle, I think, to hopefully it gets to your question in some ways, like in years past, we've incorporated eSnaps into that competition. So we would tell applicants, okay, read the detailed instructions, and then we would score your application based on the extent that you actually read the detailed instructions. We're removing that from the competitive application process this year. And we're removing that so that we can provide you technical assistance about eSnaps, right? Like there are limits to the technical assistance that we can provide to you about eSnaps, but we want to be able to support you in your endeavor to develop these project applications. So if you have questions about the project application, please reach out. The applicant profile is a little bit of a different story, right? The applicant profile has to be submitted by September the 11th. It has to be submitted by September 11th and it must be complete. And the reason for that is we need applicants to demonstrate that they have the capacity to navigate eSnaps and complete that portion of the application without input from us. Because if you are unable to complete the applicant profile, no amount of technical assistance that myself or my staff will be able to give are going to be able to get us through the remainder of this project application in the time frame that we have. So again, please read the RFP. If you reach out to us with a question that we cannot answer, we'll just tell you such and point you to the resources that will help answer your question. The MOU, so there's another question in the chat, when a projected date for when the MOU template will be available. That's a great question, Sarah. I'm hoping that we'll have that MOU template available no later than the 31st at midnight. So hopefully by the time you log on September 1st, there will be an MOU template available. So I know that I've just been talking at y'all, I feel like for an hour now or more, but there are a couple more things that I wanted to communicate, right? Which are those matching requirements. I feel like I've said it before, matches is really, really important. And the reason it's really important is because this is, non-adherence to the matching requirements are one of the most common monitoring findings that happen when a project, one of these types of projects is monitored. So if you are, commit to contributing a match and then for whatever reason don't follow through either in the documentation or in the match itself, HUD can and will hold you accountable for that matching requirement. And in some instances, I have seen them request organizations to pay back matching funds that were never actually awarded by HUD. They treat it very, very seriously. So I just want folks to go into this with eyes wide open, that the matching requirement is really important. It exists for the supplemental NOFO. I don't think it's impossible, but it is important to go in again with eyes open in terms of match. So there's a frequently asked questions document on our website that goes into a little bit more detail about what's allowable for match and it's much easier to say what's not allowable for match than it is to say what's allowable for match. But essentially, in some limited instances, leveraged healthcare resources might be eligible as match. When you are completing your application and you're giving us information about the match for this project, you will need to give us some indication that you understand the matching requirements, specifically through the letter that we're asking applicants to submit that details the match. I wish I could make that a little bit more simple. Unfortunately, it can be rather complicated. I think that the match, it's at its core is a type of leverage, right? Not all leverage is match, but all match is leverage, if that makes sense. I feel like I just confused people more. So that certificate of consistency, the HUD 2991 form, is a document that applicants will collect from their geography's consolidated planning jurisdiction. So in the balance of state, there are approximately 40 consolidated planning jurisdictions. They are listed in the RFP, or rather as an attachment, a link in the RFP. I don't have them all off the top of my head, but it is a requirement that if your project is located in a jurisdiction with a consolidated planning jurisdiction, that you have the explicit support of that consolidated planning jurisdiction. The exception to that being when your project is in multiple consolidated planning jurisdictions, you only need the support of one of those consolidated planning jurisdictions. So trying to think of an area where that might apply. Like if you're doing a large rural project and the majority of your consolidated, the majority of your project is in the state's consolidated planning jurisdiction, you can collect the consolidated planning jurisdiction certification from the state rather than having to approach every consolidated planning jurisdiction in your geography. We talked a little bit about the matching, or excuse me, the leveraging of housing or healthcare. We've talked a little bit about how these projects must align with the COC plan to address severe service needs. And yeah, I think, again, this is a complicated opportunity. I would like to underscore the fact that it is a tremendous opportunity to bring funds to your community, and would encourage you, we want this to happen. We want this to happen for you. We want this to happen for your community. So if you have questions that you think that we might be able to help with, please do not hesitate to reach out to us. The next slide has got our contact information. Multiple staff monitor that mailbox, and we can get back to you pretty quick generally if you email the TXBOS COC mailbox. But this slide has some resources for applicants, and I realize that I've been talking at y'all the whole time and didn't leave a lot of time for questions. So I'm not going to go over these resources in depth, but just know that they are available to you. And so there is a question in the chat. Is there a minimum number of MOUs that we have to have, or just those that we can gather in reference to leveraging funding in our county? Yeah, Gloria, that's a great question. So there's really not a number of MOUs that we're looking for. It is more about I want to say, it sounds kind of weird to say it, like the value. So, I mean, the more the merrier, right? Like, we're definitely not gonna, we will review every MOU that you submit. But there is no like magic number of MOUs via minimum or maximum, if that makes sense. Yeah. And I mentioned before, if you haven't signed up for our competition listserv, you can do that via that competition email list there on the slide. I'm going to stop talking and just see if there are any additional questions that maybe we haven't addressed thus far. Well, if there are no additional questions right now and folks are just kind of like on information overload, that's understandable. Again, I would just reiterate, please do not hesitate to reach out, even if you think like it's something that, you know, we've already talked about and you just can't remember, or it's something that I said today that was not clear. Please, 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 don't wait. Reach out as soon as you can, and we will do our best to get you in the information that you need to make an informed decision about what your organization is up to. Yeah, I'm sorry, Amanda, it's a lot. Yep, timeline. I hear you. I know. I know. It's a lot. All right. Well, I think we're done. If there are any questions, now is a good time, or you can email us at txboscoc@thn.org. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.